Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a good week. I have 5 books sitting next to me. I regard each of these as perfect books because I'll be doing that 5 perfect books tag that Noah at Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse tossed out last week. And among the 5 he chose was As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. And being a smart aleck, the comment I made was, well, if As I Lay Dying is Faulkner's 3rd or even 4th best book, what are the books that are better than the perfect As I Lay Dying? Are they some higher level of perfection? Is that what Dante's talking about, you know, when we get up farther and farther up the circles of the Paradiso? And I firmly believe that. As I Lay Dying is a perfect novel, sure. But I would also say and submit that I'm personally find that subjectively it is it's not my favorite Faulkner novel, and I don't know that it's the best Faulkner novel. But it can still be perfect because I don't view perfection as a foot race where we have to compare and say, okay, this is the number 1 novel and this is the number 2 and this is the number 3 and only number 1 is perfect. Everything else is, you know, it didn't quite make the cut, you know, or it didn't make the medal stand. Well, if instead we view perfection as a summit, writers can reach that summit multiple times, or artists, you know, in any art form really, they can reach that summit multiple times. And sometimes it might be faster, like a shorter work. Sometimes it might be longer, a longer work. But they're still reaching the summit of perfection, the subjective summit of my, you know, headspace, heart space. So that's sort of what I started thinking around. So I said, okay, I'm going to try and find 5 books that I regard as perfect. They reach that subjective summit for me. But I also would say that those writers have other perfect works that I maybe enjoy even more than these. So let's explore. First up, The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. An absolutely perfect science fiction novel. Le Guin excels at going in and taking tropes and archetypes and what we expect and then subverting it in some way. And she's marvelous at that. Within Left Hand of Darkness, it is, of course, our ideas around gender. And this was written published in 1969. And so it's fascinating. It's a truly fascinating book that makes us really consider ideas and really explore like our definitions of humanity that we have. And she's so clever and subtle about it. But it's also marvelously written. It's a self-contained world. You do not need any of the other Hainish novels to understand what's going on in The Left Hand of Darkness. And that's one of the things I think of in terms of perfection, are books that don't require other works in order to make sense. They don't require the author's biography in order to make sense. They are self-contained, you know, gems in and of themselves. And I say the gem because Le Guin is also just a tremendous writer. So here we go. The soundest fact may fail or prevail in the style of its telling, like that singular organic jewel of our seas, which grows brighter as one woman wears it, and worn by another, dulls and goes to dust. Facts are no more solid, coherent, round, and real than pearls are, but both are sensitive. Just a beautiful writer, and a truly marvelous, marvelous novel. Second one. You knew you weren't going to get out of here without a crime novel. So, The Polish Officer by Alan Furst. Furst, of course, writes a great number of spy novels, espionage novels, set right before and during World War II. This is one of his most fantastic, and I really do think it's a perfect novel. He has, I would say, at least 3, maybe 4, and this is one of them, The Polish Officer. And it is the main character is Captain D'Emilia, I always mess it up, D'Emilia, who becomes part of Polish intelligence in 1939, right as Poland is crushed in the Blitzkrieg that begins World War II and in Europe. And from there he travels into various parts of Eastern Europe, like trying to smuggle some gold, and ultimately all the way over to France, and even then occupied France, where he's involved in conflict there. And it's extraordinary. He's a fascinating character, but the other secondary characters that Furst creates are just so authentic, so real, and there's a sense of danger and a sense of true like sacrifice. Characters who are making a decision to stay and try to make a stand in whatever way they can. And this is how he ends the first section. Blood had been shed for this, and he goes on. D'Emilia did not believe it had been shed in vain, and stood very nearly to attention as his little army struggled past with the heavy boxes. Vladimir Hershenson, his violin carried off by Ukrainian bandits. The veterinarian who had treated the wounded, the pensioned engineer, the peasant girl. the man and woman from some comfortable professional class who had run onto a battlefield to save a life. A few country people, a few workers, women and children. Poland had lost a war. This was what was left. And he earns that. That's 35 pages in, and he's earned that. We've seen Poland lose the war. We've seen what's left. And the rest of this novel is an exploration of, now that those first sacrifices have been made, what more can they make? And it's an extraordinary novel. But it's not. It's just one of his perfect novels. Again, another one. And this is the only one of these I've read in the past year. And all of these are rereads for me. So I've reread each of these at least once. So read and reread. Just to kind of really make sure I wanted to pick books that I was sure, yes, these truly are perfect. I've returned to them and I found what I was looking for. The view from that summit is just as glorious. That would be The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And Morrison has, again, multiple perfect books, multiple books that reach that summit. She, like Le Guin, loves to take our expectations of narrative and then subvert them. And her mastery of language is second to none. So here we have a conversation that has been going on, and then the description of how children are perceiving the conversation. Their conversation is like a gently wicked dance. Sound meets sound, curtsies, shimmies, and retires. Another sound enters, but is upstaged by still another. Those two circle each other and stop. Sometimes their words move in lofty spirals, other times they take strident leaps, and all of it is punctuated with warm-pulsed laughter, like the throb of a heart made of jelly. The edge, the curl, the thrust of their emotions is always clear to Frida and me. We cannot know the meanings of all their words, for we are 9 and 10 years old. So we watch their faces, their hands, their feet, and listen for truth in the timbre. And what's most extraordinary about The Bluest Eye is, as gorgeous as the writing is, as much as the language moves, there is a true energy and vitality to how Toni Morrison uses language. As much as that is occurring in this book, the empathy that she is generating for these characters is extraordinary, and truly a precursor to the empathy and sympathy she will be generating in her later novels. This is her first one. Kind of an out of the edge classic. I don't know. I don't hear this book spoken of very frequently, but it would be The Kingdom of This World by Alejo Carpentier, a Cuban novelist. Though he spent some years in Europe, he sort of always regarded himself as a Cuban novelist. And an extraordinary book. It's a book about the Haitian Revolution. So it takes place at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century. And it is in some ways a precursor to what we think of as magical realism. And I think it's important to consider that there are some of the elements that we regard as the magic of magical realism are authentic beliefs that have been held by people and are still held by people. And Carpentier does not patronize the beliefs of his characters in here. And he didn't use the term magical realism. He preferred the marvelous real, I believe, is the translation of what he regarded. But it has that sense of there is detail, there is a sense of place and setting, and it all feels real. And there are things that happen that do not seem to feel explained by the rational and real world we inhabit. And it's important to note that Carpentier is writing this as a Marxist, as someone who doesn't necessarily believe in the supernatural, but he allows his characters to, and that's really powerful and interesting. It is also it's a very dark book. The Haitian Revolution, as with any revolution, was violent, and he does not spare the reader. As readers, we're not spared from the violence of that revolution. But he also has just this sense that looks at things from a perspective that very few writers would be willing to. So this is in a town. T. Noel, who is a slave at the time, is looking. While his master was being shaved, T. Noel could gaze his fill at the 4 wax heads that adorned the counter by the door. The curls of the wigs, opening into a pool of ringlets on the red baize, framed expressionless faces. Those heads seemed as real, although their fixed stare was so dead, as the talking head an itinerant mountebank had brought to the cap years before, to promote the sale of an elixir for curing toothache and rheumatism. By an amusing coincidence, in the window of the triple shop next door, there were calves' heads, skinned, and each with a sprig of parsley across the tongue, which possessed the very same waxy quality. They seemed to sleep among the pickled oxtails, calf's foot jelly, and pots of tripe, à la mode de Guin. Only a wooden wall separated the two counters, and it amused Tinoel to think that alongside the pale calves' heads, heads of men were served on the same tablecloth. Just as fowl for a banquet are adorned with their feathers, so some experienced macabre cook might have trimmed the heads with their best wigs. All that was lacking was a border of lettuce leaves or radishes cut in the shape of lilies. Moreover, the jars of gum arabic, the bottles of lavender water, the boxes of rice powder, close neighbors to the kettles of tripe and the platters of kidneys, completed, with this coincidence of flasks and cruets, that picture of an abominable feast. And those are the types of juxtapositions and images that Carpentier is going to give us in The Kingdom of This World. And it's a short book, it's a quick book to read. It is extraordinary. It's very dark, but it is an extraordinary reading experience. And again, one that is perfect. And then finally, a writer who I would, like many of these, has multiple works that I regard as perfect, but the one that I would say is sort of the first perfect work, the early one, would be James Ellroy's The Big Nowhere. And again, this is a dark crime novel, but it is filled with so many different personalities, and with characters who are extraordinarily obsessive about different things. And I think through that, Ellroy is showing us that our best and worst selves are driven by those obsessions. And he shows us the different ways in which we can be driven by those obsessions, whether it is, for a profession, whether it's for security, whether it is for love. Like, what are the different things that bind us? As John Webster writes in The Duchess of Malfi, whether by ambition, blood, or lust, like diamonds, we are cut by our own dust. Those are sort of those major aspects of human desire that drive us towards heights, but also towards depths. And Ellroy plumbs both of those in this book, and he explores it. He presents characters who we probably have felt a kinship towards, although these, like Jordan was mentioning in his discussion of Wuthering Heights, these characters perhaps approximate the aspirations and the depths that most of us reach as humans, but we never feel that far from them, and we never feel that far from the horrors. So this is just an incredible book. And again, it's one, this book does not require any of the other books in the LA Quartet to understand. It does not require any of the books from the Underworld USA trilogy to understand. It can stand on its own as an incredible piece of crime writing and an exploration of humanity. So these are 5 perfect novels. I did want to be careful, and I tried not to select anything I had read recently. So there are other books that I would sort of put in this perfect, but maybe not my favorite by the author, or perfect and maybe not even the author's best, but they reached that summit. But that I had read more recently, and I kind of wanted to try and make sure that I could be as objective as possible with this subjective list. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know what yours are. I'm hoping that like Jordan and Brian, there will be more people following Noah's lead on this one. So again, hope everybody's having a safe week. Thanks.